Harper Audio presents The Boy with the Latch Key by Cathy Sharp. Read by Antonia Beamish. Chapter 1. "Here's the money for some bread, Archie," Sandra Miller said. "There are eggs and bacon in the pantry so you can get yourselves a meal when you come home." The old-fashioned wireless behind her was playing one of the biggest hits of the music charts the previous year. "Oh Mine Papa," sung by Eddie Calvert, and one of Sandra's favourites. But she snapped it off impatiently as her son fiddled with his football boots and pushed the 10-shilling note at him. "Yeah, all right." Archie shoved the money into his pocket and looked bored. He knew the routine. Let yourselves in with the key that hung on a string through the letterbox, make a meal for himself and his younger sister June, and leave the washing up in the sink for when she got back. It wasn't ideal, and Sandra hated the fact that her kids were one of a growing number of latchkey kids whose mothers worked and didn't get home until later in the evening. Sandra hadn't planned this kind of life when she'd married Tim Miller. He'd been a soldier then, and the war that had devastated Europe and much of the world had been raging fiercely. They'd anticipated their wedding night, because Tim had been going back to the front, and Sandra had feared she might not see him again. However, they'd been some of the lucky ones. Tim had come through the war unscathed. He'd landed a good job as the manager of a grocery store, and until one foggy night in January 1950, Sandra's life had been perfect. Until the ring at the door, and a young constable's stuttering announcement that her husband had been killed, cycling home from work in thick fog. She'd been carrying Archie when Tim got leave from the army in November 1941 and came home to marry her. But Sandra's parents had stood by her, and she'd appreciated their loving kindness. Her throat caught with grief as she recalled the night when their house had been blown apart with them still inside. They'd had no warning, because it was one of those terrifying rockets they called the V2. It came out of the night, and suddenly a home and the people in it were gone, just like that, leaving a gaping hole in Sandra's life and that of her kids. If her parents had lived, she would have had someone to look after her children when she was working late. But unfortunately, Tim had been an orphan, and the kids had only her to feed, clothe, and teach them about life. And sometimes Sandra felt it was a heavy burden, even though Archie did all he could to help her. "What time will you be home, then?" Archie asked, a little resentful now. Sandra knew he didn't mind doing little jobs down the docks, or even washing windows for elderly neighbours to bring in a few shillings. But he hated it that she was hardly ever home before it was time for cocoa and bed. "I'm not sure," she said. "I'll come straight home from the office, I promise. I'm not working at the pub tonight." Twice a week she did a few hours in the evening at the Dog and Gun in Bethnal Green to earn extra money, because growing kids needed so much, and Sandra hated the idea that hers might have to go short. "I'm sorry, Archie," Sandra apologised, the reproach in his eyes pricking her. "I know I expect a lot of you, but I can't help it." "Yeah, I know, Mum," he said, and grinned at her. When Archie smiled, it was as if the sun had come out. With his dark red hair and his green eyes, he was the image of his father, and her heart turned over with love. "We'll be all right." "I know I can rely on you to take care of June." "Yeah, I'll look out for the brat." From the lofty position of his 13 years, Archie saw his 9-year-old sister as a troublesome kid. But despite their constant bickering, Sandra knew that he would care for her as best he could. Yet he shouldn't have so much responsibility, and it hurt Sandra because she couldn't provide the loving, stable home her children were entitled to. Leaving the house, Sandra ran to the end of the dingy lane to catch her bus because she didn't want to be late for the office. She was so used to the boarded-up houses on either side that she no longer noticed. This slum area was all she
Sample complete. Ready to continue?